Well, this morning I'm presenting my evaluation of the Paris 2024 Cultural Olympiad to the IOC Culture and Olympic Heritage Commission. And I will start by reminding everyone what the goals of this Cultural Olympiad were, in the knowledge that normally people are unclear on what this program is about. How different is it from the opening and closing ceremonies? What role does it play compared to the torch relay or to the many sponsor activations and entertainment that takes place in the Olympic City? The Cultural Olympiad is the official cultural program of the Olympic Games, and it's the opportunity for the host country to involve their artists and cultural operators to offer some context to the Games and to represent themselves, not represent that edition of the Games at a moment in time and in concrete locations. So in the case of Paris, there was a vision that started with a very strong commitment and celebration to presenting this as a French Cultural Olympiad. So this is the take from the French operators and the façon de vivre and the way of thinking, celebrating this in all the ways possible. Also responding to the vision of this edition of the Games, the cutting across, and that was also at the very heart of how venues were developed, how the sports program was advanced. And it's this notion of Olympic Games wide open. In French, it was ouvrons grand les jeux, no? Open up, expand. This was clear in the choice for the opening ceremony. Very extremely ambitious take to do this for the first time outside of a stadium, cutting across the whole city of Paris with the River Seine at its heart. No, this was the way in which the ceremonies responded to the Games wide open vision. The Cultural Olympiad did the same. And for it to be wide open, it had to be expanding. So territorially, obviously taking place throughout the whole of France and the foreign territories. There were also 24 foreign countries that hosted activities. The fact that it would take place beyond the usual spaces for culture, in the public domain, also in sport competition venues, in really unusual areas, and obviously doing so across all kinds of abilities and communities. To be popular, so yes, to engage, it was with a very high quality standards, but engaging the grassroots and wanting to make things a celebration that would connect with everyone, that would be easy, very accessible. Artist-led, so that's another commitment. It's not something that happens in every Cultural Olympiad for the Games, but in this case, yes, making sure that all the projects that would get this official label would have an artistic vision behind, but in partnership and collaborating with across as many different stakeholders and sectors as possible. And finally, yes, to be very participative. In France, the notion of the amateur is very strong and widely used. In other countries, we might use it differently. Here we had, yes, there was even an aspect of the Olympiad that was about l'Olympiade culturelle des amateurs, a lot of initiatives led by non-professionals that would anyway deliver high quality standards, and some really mass participation events with over 1 or 2 million volunteers and amateur dancers contributing in some of the kind of highlight projects. So this is the vision and the basis on which the Cultural Olympiad operated, and the specific goals attached to that, and that are what has guided this evaluation, have been, yes, the capacity to link art and sport. So anyone involved in this Cultural Olympiad had to address that main goal. Transforming partnerships and ways of working as a second priority goal. The third, to diversify the publics for culture, for art and sport. and finally engaging all territories in France and overseas. So in my discussions with the Culture Commission today, what I will be focusing on is on the second goal, which is the way that the Cultural Olympiad in Paris advanced new ways of collaboration and developing partnerships, both in terms of artistic partnerships, but also in terms of financial partnerships, who funds the initiatives and for how long. And in the broader evaluation report, which I will present and discuss in other occasions, there is also important reflections to be made on how all of this was managed, how this label was created, to what extent it added value, and what kind of legacy it can leave, with certainly also some space to debate the challenges. So with the time I have left, I will only do a couple more slides, trying to see how I learned to do these little micro films as short as possible, just to give you an overview of what these Cultural Olympiad projects were about and the range of themes they cover. So 2,596 projects got this label, the officially approved label, and were presented and listed within the official pages of the Olympic Games. There was a dedicated webpage. There was also an application during Games time. So all of these activities could be found there, listed under culture, and obviously linked up to the locations where they were taking place. All of these projects, the ones approved, would respond to the ambition to link art and sport, but beyond that, they would have other themes that were their guiding anchor. So these themes are separated in a few groupings, and there are probably three main areas that we can identify here. One, so over 35% of the projects that were really precisely about the relationship between art and sport, something that in fact in many countries has not been explored sufficiently. For France, as it happened in the UK previously with London, it was quite an eye-opener for many institutions, especially those very, very well established, to see how powerful and how inspiring it could be to take seriously a collaboration with athletes, or trying to work on a stadium, or be part of a sporting competition, etc., etc. So 35% of the projects would have that also as the core, and in their title, in their whole ethos. And then there is another 19% that would explore the relationship to sport, but also the Olympic movement and the Paralympic movement from a more heritage point of view. So also revisiting history, exploring the archives, how this has shaped different communities, identities, and cultures. So a very, very heavy, very ambitious and fascinating take by the libraries across France, all the national archives. So that has also been a major operation, probably is one of the areas that will leave one of the strongest legacy. This reconnection and rethinking about how sport has shaped places across France, and also how sport relates and explains cultural and artistic movements. And finally, the rest, that is around 46% in total, would emphasize and focus on connections with particular communities. So they work with amateurs on the one hand, with young people and education as a core. Hip hop and urban cultures was also one of the big innovations for the Games and the sports program, for the first time having urban sports officially and getting medals. So there was a response to that as well on the France take on that, and obviously very defining and iconic artists, both in terms of street movements, in terms of dance, in terms of spoken word, in terms of visual arts. They work with disability and the connection with the Paralympics, essential. I mean, this Cultural Olympiad was one across the two games. And finally, also some of the projects that would emphasize that connection between women and sport. So here we are. And finally, it's important and impressive to look at that geographical spread. So what we're seeing here is important to interpret the numbers right, is the distribution of activities. So obviously we have around 2,600 projects, but those projects would also result into thousands of activities, no exhibition days, workshops, anything that would be happening on the day-to-day. Some projects would take place over a few months. Some projects would take place in several locations. So what we're here seeing is the account for the activities, and we have been able to document properly over 109,000 activities. Indeed, the majority concentrated in France, in continental France. This is 96% of those activities, but we have 2% that would take place across the different overseas territories of France, and the others, which is around 469 activities, would be spread across the rest of the world. So here you have some of those, the way they pop up and the way they show. And yes, countries in Latin America, certainly, also in Canada, some, yes, locations in the Middle East, in Asia, and across Africa, connected with this label. And finally, yes, what I will try is to dig into what was innovative with the approaches to transformation, but I will do this in another clip, just to make sure that the data downloads and so on are manageable.